She fed a little boy every single day, never knowing that one afternoon, 4 black SUVs would arrive and turn her life upside down forever. This is not just a story about food, it is a story about kindness, fate, and how a simple plate of rice can open the door to a destiny no one planned. If you're just seeing this channel for the first time, kindly do well to subscribe, like, share, and drop a comment. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's dive in. In the busy heart of Umunzi town, where dust clung stubbornly to the air and the sun never seemed to rest, lived a woman named Sandra. Every morning before the first rooster finished clearing its throat, Sandra was already awake. She washed her face with cold water, tied her wrapper firmly around her waist, and stepped outside into the quiet dawn. By the time the town began to breathe, when traders shouted prices, Okada riders revved their engines, and school children dragged tired feet toward the road, Sandra's food stand was already alive. Her stall was small, just a wooden table, a faded umbrella, and 2 battered coolers filled with steaming food. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in warmth. Sandra cooked with care. Not because she was rich, she wasn't, but because she believed that food carried spirit, and who ate from her pot deserved to be satisfied. "Ah, Sandra, give me that your stew," the Okada riders would say. "Today I need strength," a trader might add. She served them all with the same gentle smile. Yet behind that smile was a woman who understood struggle. Sandra had lost her parents early. She had no husband, no children, and no one to lean on when business was slow. Some days after counting her money at night, she would sigh and whisper to herself that tomorrow must be better. Still, she never hardened her heart. That was why, on one quiet morning, she noticed him. He was sitting on a low block beside her food stand, a little boy, about 8 years old. His clothes were dusty, his slippers torn, and his eyes, those eyes looked older than his face. They carried a tiredness no child should know. Sandra watched him for a while. He didn't beg, he didn't cry. He just sat there, staring at the food as if afraid to hope. Customers came and went, but the boy didn't move. Finally, Sandra called out softly, "My son, have you eaten today?" The boy raised his head slowly and shook it. That was all. No long story. No excuses. Sandra didn't ask where his parents were. She didn't ask why he was alone. She simply scooped a full plate of food, added extra meat, and placed it in front of him. "Eat," she said gently. The boy hesitated, as if the food might disappear if he reached for it. Then, carefully, he began to eat, and as Sandra watched him, something stirred in her chest. Something like a quiet ache. She didn't know it then, but that single plate of food was the first step toward a future she could never have imagined. By the time the sun climbed high over Umunzi, the little boy was still there, quiet, watching, waiting. And destiny had already begun its slow walk toward Sandra's roadside stand. The next morning, Sandra noticed him before she even finished arranging her plates. The little boy was there again. He sat in the same spot beside her food stand, knees drawn close to his chest, eyes fixed on the ground as though he was afraid the earth itself might speak his secrets aloud. Sandra paused. For a moment she wondered if yesterday had been a dream. But when the boy lifted his head and their eyes met, she knew it was real. "You again?" she asked gently. He nodded. That was all. Sandra felt something twist inside her chest. Not annoyance, not fear, but concern. Still, she said nothing. She served her customers as usual, the clang of spoons against plates mixing with the familiar noise of the street. When the breakfast rush slowed, she walked over to him. "Have you eaten today?" He shook his head. Again, Sandra scooped food into a plate. Again, she added meat. Again, she placed it before him without demanding explanations. The boy ate quietly, carefully, as if he had learned long ago not to waste anything given freely. That day, he stayed. He watched Sandra wash plates. He watched her collect money. When a plate slipped from her hand, he rushed forward and caught it before it hit the ground. Sandra stared at him, surprised. "You are sharp," she said. The boy gave a small smile, the first she had seen. Before leaving that evening, Sandra asked softly, "What is your name?" There was a long pause. "Eze," he said finally, his voice barely louder than the wind. "Where do you stay, Eze?" she asked. The boy looked away. Sandra understood then that the questions were too heavy. She didn't push. From that day on, Eze came every morning, rain or shine, market day or quiet day. He arrived early and stayed until sunset, Sometimes he helped wipe tables, sometimes he fetched water, sometimes he just sat quietly behind the stand, watching Sandra work. People began to notice. "Who is that boy?" one woman asked. "Probably an abandoned child," another replied. "Ah, Sandra, you have adopted a son now?" someone joked. Sandra laughed it off. But at night, when business slowed and hunger returned to the street, she packed leftover food and handed it to Az. "Eat well," she told him. One evening, when she was about to close, she noticed Az lingering behind the shed where she kept her firewood. "You don't go home?" she asked gently. He shook his head. Something heavy settled in her heart. She spread an old mat behind the kitchen shed and gave him a wrapper to cover himself. "Sleep here tonight," she said. "Just for tonight." Ez's eyes widened, not with fear, but relief. That night, as Sandra lay on her thin mattress, listening to the distant sounds of the town settling into sleep, she wondered who Eze truly was. She didn't know it yet. But while Umunze slept peacefully, somewhere far away, powerful men were searching desperately for a boy who had quietly found safety beside a woman with nothing but a kind heart and a pot of food. Days had become part of Sandra's routine. If she arrived before dawn, he was already waiting. If she came late, he sat patiently on the low block, eyes scanning the road until she appeared. He no longer hesitated before eating. Still quiet, still reserved, but now comfortable. Sandra began to notice small things. How he always waited for her to sit before touching his food. How he stacked plates neatly, even when no one asked him to. How he flinched at loud shouts, as though noise reminded him of something he wanted to forget. One afternoon, after the sun had beaten down without mercy, Sandra poured water into a bowl and called him closer. "Come," she said, "your hands are dirty." Ez obeyed. She scrubbed his hands gently, then his face. The dust lifted, revealing soft skin and a neat scar near his left eyebrow. His hair, once matted, curled naturally beneath the grime. "You are a fine boy," she murmured. Ez lowered his eyes. From that day she washed him whenever she could. Sometimes she gave him clean clothes from a bundle she kept for charity, old but neat. People talked. "That woman is wasting food on a stranger," one man scoffed. "Soon he will bring trouble," another warned. "Children like that don't come without stories," someone added. Sandra heard them all. She said nothing. At night, E slept behind the kitchen shed, curled like a kitten on the mat she had given him. When rain threatened, she dragged a piece of zinc closer to shield him. Once she asked softly, "Ez, do you remember your parents?" He froze. His fingers tightened around the wrapper. "I remember voices," he whispered, "and lights, many people." That was all he said. Sandra didn't ask again. What she didn't know was that far beyond Umun's, past the dusty roads and noisy markets, there was a house filled with shouting, tears, and fear. A powerful man paced endlessly in a wide living room. Chief Dominic Okafor. His only son was missing. Security men searched forests, markets, and highways. Police stations buzzed with reports. Radio announcements echoed through towns. A small boy had disappeared during a family event. But in Umunze, no radio announcement mentioned a food stand. No police officer passed by Sandra's shed. No one imagined that the boy they were hunting for was sleeping peacefully behind a roadside kitchen. To Umunze, Eze was invisible, just another child the world had forgotten. But kindness had already claimed him, and destiny, silent, patient, was drawing closer. It first spread through the radio of a nearby provision shop, crackling through the morning air as traders paused to listen. Chief Dominic Okafor is offering a reward of 100 million naira to anyone who finds his missing son alive. People froze. Some dropped their goods. Others gasped aloud. 100 million? Someone shouted. Is the child gold? Another asked. By midday, the whole town of Amuns was buzzing. Posters appeared on walls and poles. A boy's face printed clearly, neat haircut, bright clothes, smiling beside a man in expensive attire. Social media exploded. Police checkpoints multiplied. Every child on the street was suddenly examined with sharp, desperate eyes. Sandra heard the talk but paid little attention. She was busy stirring her pot when a customer leaned in and said, "Have you heard? A billionaire's son is missing. Whoever finds him will never suffer again." Sandra nodded absent-mindedly. Behind her, Ezzy sat quietly, washing plates. He did not look up. That afternoon, a group of men gathered near her stand, arguing loudly. "If I see that boy, I will drag him straight to the police," one said. Ah, even if I see him sleeping in the bush, I will carry him, another replied. With 100 million, I will buy land in 3 states, a third laughed. Sandra felt a strange unease settle in her chest. She turned and looked at Ez. For the first time, she truly looked at him. The shape of his nose, the calm confidence in his posture, the way he listened more than he spoke. Her heart skipped. She reached for one of the posters that had fallen near the road. Her eyes traced the boy's picture. Then her hands began to shake. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Sandra lowered the paper slowly. Ez was watching her. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. The noise of the street faded, leaving only the sound of Sandra's heartbeat pounding in her ears. Still, she said nothing. That night, Sandra barely slept. Questions chased each other in her mind. Could it be? Or am I imagining things? If it is him, what do I do? By morning, she had made a decision. Whatever the truth was, Ez was safe with her. She would not chase money. She would not expose him to danger. She would wait. She didn't know that waiting had an end. Because somewhere beyond Umunze, engines were already warming up, and a convoy was preparing to move. The afternoon sun stood directly above Umunze, heavy and unforgiving. Sandra wiped sweat from her forehead as she served her last few customers. Ez sat behind the stand, eating quietly, just as he had done every day. Nothing felt unusual. Then the ground began to vibrate. At first, people thought it was thunder. Then came the sound. Deep, powerful engines, rolling closer and closer. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. 4 black SUVs drove slowly into the narrow street, polished and imposing, dust rising behind them like a warning. The street froze. Who is coming? Someone whispered. Is it government people? Another asked. The vehicles stopped directly in front of Sandra's food stand. Silence fell. Doors opened. Men in black suits stepped out, their eyes sharp, movements controlled. Police officers followed, scanning faces. A woman jumped out of the last SUV, clutching a photograph tightly in her hand. Her eyes moved from face to face until they landed on Ez. She screamed, "That's him! That's my child!" The world shattered. Before Sandra could move, the woman rushed forward, dropping to her knees and pulling Ez into her arms. The boy froze for a second, then something in him broke free. "Mama!" he cried. The crowd exploded. Phones came out. People shouted. Some gasped, others cursed under their breath. Security men sounded the area as relatives poured in. Tears, voices, trembling hands touching Az as if to confirm he was real. Sandra stood frozen behind her stand. Her legs felt weak. A tall man approached her, the lead security officer. "Madam," he said firmly, "has this boy been staying with you?" Sandra swallowed. "Yes." "Has he been eating here?" "Yes." "Did you know who he was?" She shook her head slowly. "He just came," she said, her voice soft but steady. "He was hungry. I fed him." The officer stared at her, then turned and made a call. Moments later, he held up his phone. On the screen appeared a man with tired eyes and a face lined by fear and relief. Chief Dominic Okafor. The officer explained everything. Sandra watched as the billionaire listened in silence. When she finished telling her story, Chief Dominic closed his eyes. Then he spoke. "This woman protected my son when it failed him," he said. "She fed him without asking questions." He looked directly at Sandra through the screen. "Madam, you are a blessing." Then his voice hardened with authority. "Give her the reward. All of it, now." The street erupted. People screamed, some cried, others stood in disbelief. 100 million. Sandra's hands trembled as reality crashed over her, from a struggling food seller to the woman whose kindness had rewritten her destiny. But this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Umunza did not sleep that night. By evening, Sandra's small food stand had become the center of the town. People gathered in groups, whispering, arguing, praising, and doubting all at once. "She deserves it," some said. "God is truly alive," others whispered. A few shook their heads in envy. "If it were me, I would have demanded more." Sandra sat quietly inside her room, the noise of the town humming beyond her walls. 100 million. The words still felt unreal. Her hands that had counted small change every night, now trembled as she remembered how Chief Dominic had spoken her name with respect. But what shook her most was Az. Late that night, the convoy returned. This time there was no crowd, no shouting, only calm. Az stepped out of the SUV and ran straight into Sandra's arms. "I will come back," he said quickly, afraid she might disappear. "Please." Sandra held him tightly. "My son," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Chief Dominic watched from a distance. He approached slowly, not as a billionaire, but as a father who had seen fear. "You didn't just feed my son," he said quietly. "You gave him safety. You gave him peace." From that day on, Sandra's life changed, but not the way people expected. She did not abandon her town. She did not forget her roots. Instead, she built a larger food center, employing widows and struggling women. She fed children who came hungry, just as Ez once had. Easy visited often, sometimes with escorts, sometimes without. Each time he ran to Sandra's kitchen, laughing free. To him, she was not just the woman who fed him. She was home. Years later, elders would tell the story under moonlight, that a woman once fed a hungry child without knowing his name, his status, or his worth. And fate, watching quietly, decided to reward her not just with wealth, but with honor, purpose, and a love that money could never buy. Moral: kindness is a seed. You may not know what it will grow into, but it will always return with a harvest. And in Umunze, they still say, be careful how you treat the hungry stranger. He may be your destiny in disguise. Kindly do well to subscribe, like, share, and drop a comment. Your support keeps these stories alive.